My name is Aratrika Banerjee. I am an assistant professor with the Department of CSEDS at Haldia Institute of Technology. And today I will be delivering a lecture on business continuity plan, risk assessment, and business impact analysis. So, what is a business continuity plan? A business continuity plan is any plan which is used to keep a business operational when it is hit with a disaster. So, a BCP not only gives a plan for how to recover your information systems when it is hit with a disaster, but it also gives a detailed plan of how to prevent and recover your company from potential threats. So whenever a BCP is created, inputs are taken from all the stakeholders of an organization, so everyone can contribute their suggestions on how to keep a business sustained during a critical time. When a BCP is created, things such as secondary threats or indirect threats should also be kept in mind. Indirect threats could be, for example, if a country's IT infrastructure or internet services are attacked, for example, then what should be the plan of action in that case? Or if the roads surrounding an organization are damaged, then what could be an alternative form of transportation? Such things should be covered in a business continuity plan. Obviously, why is business continuity plan required? So, a BCP is should be created with a purpose. If there is no need for a BCP, or if your organization is not vulnerable to any threats, or if it is highly secure, then your organization does not require a BCP. But for finding out if the need for a business continuity plan arises, all the stakeholders of a company or an organization should have a discussion on these following questions, like: can a business afford to keep its operations suspended during some time? Or if it is hit with a disaster, for example, flood, earthquake, or accidental fires, then will it be able to survive? Will it be able to retain all its resources and continue with its activities? Or can it afford to lose a majority of its customer base? Or how much revenue can it afford to lose over a span of time? So once you have a suitable answer to all of these questions, then your organization can go ahead and start preparing a business continuity plan. So henceforth, for the rest of this lecture, I will be discussing with you these following points, which are the role of risk assessment and business impact analysis in business continuity management. Then what are some different risk assessment methods, how to perform risk analysis and evaluation, how to identify the critical resources and activities for a business, so that is establishing BIA resource and activity dependencies. Then how to set BIA criteria for your organization. Then how to determine the maximum tolerable period of disruption. So this is the period of time for which a business can keep its operations suspended before it starts seeing significant losses. Then what are the outputs which we get out of performing a business impact analysis process? Then what are the common challenges which are faced while performing a BIA, and how to overcome these challenges? Now, coming to the role of risk assessment and BIA in business continuity management. So there are a lot of generalized ISO standards, specifically the ISO 22301, that is a standard for business continuity management and risk assessment, and it majorly focuses on how to recover or it prioritizes the recovery of those activities, those business activities which have been disrupted first, rather than trying to compensate and deliver the output of those activities in any way possible. So for recovering those activities, we need to identify the risks which are associated with them. If some of you have seen the lecture on risk management, you will remember that a risk is composed of threats and vulnerabilities. So here in the ISO standard basically refers to these sort of threats. Rather, the first component of the risk assessment would be threats. So the different types of threats which we can face are environmental, like flooding, earthquake, etc. Or there could be some accidental threats like breakage of equipment, or some accidental fires in your organization. Or there could be secondary threats like the one I mentioned about your country's IT infrastructure getting attacked. So likewise, to remember the different types of threats, we have an acronym called as PESL. So this is a mnemonic which stands where here P stands for political, E for environmental, S for social, T for technical, L for legal, and E for ethical. So these are the areas from which a business or an organization can face threats. Now we need to remember that it is not necessary that a threat would materialize 100%. So that is what I have written here. Less than 100% means it is there is no guarantee that a threat would occur 100%, but it is still likely, it is still possible. Then anything is vulnerable to threats. Likewise, in businesses also, all the resources that a business uses, whether it be people or some computer systems or some other equipment or supplies or stocks, so all of these things are vulnerable to threats, and if a threat impacts any of these resources, then ultimately some business activity can be affected or it can be suspended. Now, once we have identified all the risks that a business can face, we need to classify them into either acceptable risks and or unacceptable risks. So the acceptable risks can be left alone, but they still need to be monitored, whereas the unacceptable risks need to be dealt with. And the way to handle these unacceptable risks is to put in place a business continuity plan or a business continuity measure along with some other control measures. So again, coming to the example of floods, if your organization is faced with a lot of floods, then you can have a business continuity measure which deals with the flooding situation as and when it occurs, along with a control measure like a flood defense mechanism that reduces the likelihood of the flooding situation ever occurring. So in information systems or in IT systems also, in IT organizations also, a suite of preventative measures are used which reduce the likelihood of any threat ever materializing on their systems. Okay. So now we have covered business continuity plan, which is just one part of a strategy to keep business operations up and running. The other part of the strategy is to actually identify the critical activities and the resources which are required to perform those activities in a business. So, and that is why we perform a business impact analysis process. Now, for example, identifying activities or resources could mean if you have a manufacturing business, then obviously the production or manufacturing activity would be the primary activity, and activities such as administration or accounting or training would be secondary activities. But keep in mind that, I mean, you could also comprehend that all of these activities would also require some resources, people, or computer equipment, or any other hardware equipment for uh, that means those resources could be required for performing these primary and secondary activities. So all those resources as well as primary and secondary activities are identified in the BIA. Another case could be that some activities could be dependent on other business activities. So those dependent activities are also identified in the BIA process. So after performing the BIA, there are many outputs that we can get from a BIA process, but the three major outputs that I have shown here are the MBCO, which is the minimum business continuity objective. Minimum business continuity objective means what is the minimum level of activity required to keep your business functioning. So this would tell you what are the resources required for maintaining a minimum level of activity. So this would tell you the number of people you need to keep employed, or the number of transactions that you need to perform in a day. Okay, stuff like that. Then the MPCO, again, I am reiterating, it is the minimum level of activity that a business requires to sustain itself during a critical period of time. Then we have the RTO, which is the recovery time objective, which means what is the maximum time period or the maximum time that you can take to recover the disrupted activities which have been affected. Then obviously here you have dependencies, which means you need to identify those activities which are dependent on other activities. So all the atomic activities and the critical resources required to perform those atomic activities are identified in these dependencies. Next, I'll just give you a brief overview of the risk management process, because this part has already been covered in a separate lecture. There's a separate lecture for risk management, so you can go ahead and check that out if you feel. So I'll just give a brief overview here. So there are a lot of ISO, generalized ISO standards. If I were to mention one, there is a standard called as ISO 31000 that references this model of risk management process. So here the three main components of the risk management process are risk identification. This is pretty obvious. Here you identify all the risks associated with one or more business activities. Then you have the risk analysis phase. Here again, if you remember if you check out the risk management lecture, there we have discussed about quantitative risk analysis and qualitative risk analysis. So both of these are used to provide a scoring or a measurement of the level of risk affecting an activity. Okay. Next, we come to the risk evaluation part. Here we simply classify all the risks which we have identified into acceptable risks or unacceptable risks. There could also be three-class classification like a low risk, medium risk, or high risk. Or in some organizations, even this classification is not performed. You just assign a percentage of acceptability. So a risk could be 40% acceptable to an organization or 60% acceptable to an organization. Likewise, okay. All the acceptable risks, again, they are left alone, but they are still monitored by an organization. So that is why we perform the monitoring and review process. Whereas for the unacceptable risks, we need to devise an action plan or a business continuity plan. Okay, so this is basically a slide similar to this previous slide. This slide also details or mentions the same phases of the risk management process. Next. Okay. So now coming to the risk identification portion. Again, like I mentioned, a risk cannot exist unless there is a suitable combination of a threat and a vulnerability. Now, all threats cannot exploit all vulnerabilities. So this slide here is basically a small exercise for you where you would be required to match each threat with one or more vulnerabilities. So if I were to consider this fire or explosion threat, then I would be able to map it with all the vulnerabilities listed here except for people, business processes and money. Okay. So likewise, you can also perform the same mapping. And another long answer type question which can come from this slide is, you could be asked to justify the mapping which you have performed. Like see, if I have matched fire with all of these 6-7 vulnerabilities, then I would be asked to provide a single line statement justifying why I feel that this thread can exploit all of these vulnerabilities. Okay, so just a small exercise for you. Now we come to the risk analysis phase. Again, this would be pretty much familiar with those people who have watched the risk management lecture. So this matrix here is called the risk matrix, which looks like a heat map. Again, an interesting thing to note here is the extra red box which we have here, right here. So this box basically represents the appetite or the comfort level of an organization to deal with various types of risks. So here, if you observe, any risk that crosses an impact level of 4 or above will automatically be classified as a high impact risk. Okay, so here again you have the risk formula where we calculate the likelihood of the risk, that is the probability that a risk will materialize, multiply that with what is going to be the consequence of that risk if it materializes. Okay. Then coming to the impact criteria. So impact criteria can be subjective to different organizations. That means different organizations can consider these different impact levels to mean different things. So here we have an example of an organization describing the impact level. So what do they mean by catastrophic? What do they mean by intolerable? So this is again an example of qualitative risk management where you provide a description of the level of impact. This table on the right here is an example of semi-quantitative risk analysis or semi-quantitative impact analysis. So here you can see not only is the financial bracket given here for each impact level, but the other subjective criteria are also mentioned for each impact level. So if you can see here, for insignificant or level 1 impact level, the financial loss would be 50,000 pounds. For moderate impact level, the financial loss would be 251,000 pounds to 1 million pounds. Okay. Along with this, you also have the reputational damage which would be caused at each impact level. Then what would be the media fallout at each impact level? Then for how many number of days would a business remain closed, or how many personnel would be lost at each impact level. Okay, so all of these subjective criteria also have to be in correlation with the financial